When I was a child, we had no electricity. I remember those times. The conveniences that came with electricity was so wonderful. To be able to turn on a radio. We didn't have a radio. Our neighbors had one, and we'd go there and listen to that sometimes. You could turn on a light, just with a click of a switch. We used to have to get up on a chair and light the mantles every night. And if you touched it, it broke, and you were in trouble because you didn't have any light then.
I remember being a kid, if you touched those mantles, after they had been used, they fell apart. I did that a time or two. I was soon told not to. I can remember my grandmother client lived in Virginia, and we go there and she had electricity. I thought, boy, she's living really good.
We were so excited just getting electricity. The day that the electricity went on is the best one. Boy, we just screamed bloody murder. Went running to my dad, and he knew what happened just by seeing us come and holler. That was a big deal, boy, when we saw those lights go on.
I was 10 years old at the time. We had a great big round table in the dining room. The lamp sat in the middle of the table, and if you wanted to read, you had to get a chair close to the table. The refrigerator, you had to bring ice from Lincoln. It was a great day when we first turned the electricity on. It was really great to have all that light. So it meant a lot to us.
When I was about 10, we began hearing about going to have electricity, and it was really exciting. CIPS went just within 2 miles of us, but they just had a main line, and so only people on that road could get it. It must have been about a year that we talked about this, and of course we'd watch the poles go up and the men putting the wires on them and everything. And we had a monthly meeting of this ag club, and we were all excited about who was going to get to be the family that had electricity first. And so we couldn't wait to find out which family was going to get hooked up by Menard Electric. It was Menard that was where we were in Mason County. And we won the contest. It came to our house first, and everybody was so excited when they came. A little envious, I would say, too, but they went around and looked at all of the things and said no shadows anymore, because until then we had used kerosene lamps and gasoline lamps.
I'm old enough to remember when the co-op first started, and I lived out in the country. I lived half a mile off of the main road. At that time, the co-op was extending their electric lines throughout the area. The neighbors went around trying to get people to sign up, and some were hesitant, some refused, others were anxious. And I was unfortunate. My father died when I was 6, so my mother, I remember a neighbor coming to talk to her about signing up. As I remember, the fee was $3, and that was hard to come by at that time for our family. And as I remember, she signed up, but then was told, well, sorry, we can't do anything for you. The requirement was you had to have 3 meters per mile of line. We lived a half a mile off of the road, main road. There was no house within half a mile to the east of us, one house half a mile to the west of us, and they didn't want electricity. So we sat and labored for 2 or 3 years until probably about 1940. Then when they finally did build a line up to our house and turned the electricity on, that was a great day in our life.
As far as I know, there wasn't any REA group in Beeson area. That's where I came from. And so Dad had to pay the power company to build a line from the main line to our house.
It wasn't that they didn't want to serve the rural people, but it was not profitable. They're committed to make a profit for their stockholders, or they have no sense of being. And so unless you live very close to the road where the line was, if you wanted service, you had to pay to have that service built to you, whatever it cost. And it was right expensive, so most people didn't have electricity.
In the late 30s, I don't remember exactly the year, but we did not have electricity, and it was to see the lines being built and service being put to the house was really something that my mom was just tickled to death, to be able to have an electric range and refrigerator, and we had a light in every room. We didn't have to carry the lamps around anymore. And of course the same way, electricity in the barns, to not have to carry lanterns around and everything. So it was an exciting time.
Well, I think the Rural Electrification Act signed by Franklin Roosevelt, I think was one of the greatest things that he probably ever accomplished. Obviously, it's been a benefit to people in the rural areas, because prior to 1936, very few people in the farming community had electricity, especially below Route 80 in Illinois. And so it wasn't until Rural Electrification Act came into being that people in the rural area had any hopes for anything. There was just no investor company that would put lines out and have 2 and 3 meters per mile of line, and in some cases less than that, because it was not profitable for them. Consequently, the leadership of some of the leading farmers in all of the areas, particularly around Petersburg, the directors met, and at the old Farm Bureau building, and Lloyd Chalcraft was the farm advisor. He helped steer them, and they met and finally came up with the idea that they could themselves, through the REA, create a better living and an easier life for the people in the rural community.
But the Rural Electrification Act did help that, because it made money available at 2.5%, and it made it feasible. A lot of the technical help came directly from REA. They sent field representatives to assist rural people to build and learn how to manage and run an electric co-op. So that was a good part. That's the only way it could happen. And it's the best thing probably ever happened to this country. That's one time our legislators were right.
They were successful. They were way far their time and their thinking. And I recall the first pole, I believe, that the Menard Electric set was over around Sherman. And in 1937, and just before I retired, they retired that pole in 1993 and brought it into the office. I don't know whatever happened to it, but it had been in the ground since 1937. And that particular pole was a good one.
I don't think that most people realize what really providing electricity entails. Electricity, I think, was one of the things that started us on the road to recovery. Probably the rank and file of us aren't appreciative. We think because we pay the bill, it's our privilege. How would we get along without it?
One of the things that I think is important about Menard Electric is the long-term nature of service of the employees. In the 75 years that Menard Electric's been in existence, there have only been 5 managers. I'm the 5th. In the previous 4, A.E. Becker, Mr. Bell, John Root, and Dorland Smith served the co-op for those 75 years. And with that, you got a continuity of leadership and a continuity of values through the cooperative's management. In addition to that, the co-op has always had an employee base that has looked at the cooperative as a career. And so with that, more than 90% of our employees only leave the cooperative at the time of retirement. There's not a lot of in and out of employees. There's not a lot of employees who don't work at the cooperative through their entire career. And with that, you get a wonderful gain of experience and knowledge that just runs throughout the entire cooperative core.
A cooperative is a group of people that's trying to help others. And everyone seemed to have that same attitude, and it made it enjoyable, and you work together hand in hand, good times, bad times. Here, my first day with Menard Electric was March the 8th of 1965, and I retired probably around the 1st of May 1986. I really looked forward every day to going to work because there was something important to do and something interesting and some great people to work with. I can't emphasize that enough. And the membership out there, especially the old timers who had seen the time there was no electricity, had appreciation for what we were trying to do. And we'll give you a pat on the back once in a while, you know, and spur you on to even do better things.
Back in the beginning, when the co-op first started, they had a man by the name of Fred Darr who was a promoter, and he spent all of his time going out and holding meetings and trying to educate the farmers and their wives about the use of electricity and how that would help ease their burden of living on the farm.
When we come to Menard County here in 41, I actually known personally some of the founders of Menard Electric. Henry Colby was one of the founders, and he only lived a couple miles or 3 from us. I've heard some people getting run off when they went out. In the early days, said, well, you know, we want to build a line by your house. In other words, they were told no way they was going to do that. But in general, I think most everyone was quite receptive to the idea of getting electricity. But of course, after World War II, everyone understood that it was just one of those things you got to have.
Growing up without electricity and then having electricity, of course, was one of these things that we all look forward to. But knowing that we were able to bring a higher standard of living to the rural area, it's kind of strange, but as the co-op was putting in the lines in the 40s and after the war, there were a lot of people that probably could have gotten service from the investor-owned utility, but because the investor-owned utility wouldn't do it without a high cost back in the 30s, these people said, no, we're going to wait on the co-op. And they waited for us to bring them service.
The biggest plus Menard Electric has delivered to the area is the irrigation. I learned a lot from Morris Bell. He taught me a lot about irrigation that I didn't know.
The northern part of our electric system has an aquifer, and there's a lot of water available to the people in Mason County and the other, Tazewell and other parts of our system. A man told me once, he said, before we got electricity for irrigation, he said people didn't want this land in Mason County. It's just sandburrs.
I'm a graduate from the University of Illinois as an ag engineer, and one of the things that I was interested in at that time was why wasn't there more irrigation in the Mason County area? And come to find out at that time, and this was in the mid-50s, that irrigation was pretty labor intensive. We had a number of innovative farmers up there that came to us and said, you need to be able to provide electricity for these irrigation systems. And I went out to Nebraska and met with some of the co-ops in Nebraska to learn how they were doing it, and came back and we instituted an irrigation rate separate from all of our other rates, trying to promote irrigation.
We were able to get an electric rate for them so that they could irrigate their land and make money on land that was practically worthless. That's all because of the electric system providing a rate that they could use to make a profit on that property.
We converted several LP systems to electricity in the mid-1960s, and as a result, we were able to convince some of the farmers that this was the way to go.
I would have to admit that it was sort of a hard sell when those that were few that were irrigating were using diesel mostly, And to compare the price of fuel at that time with today's cost of diesel fuel was just astronomical. But at that time, we believed that there was a savings, there was a more efficiency that the farmer received. We really felt that we were doing a service to the community and to the farmer, because there was no doubt of the increase in yields of their grain. It was going from probably 50, 60 bushels an acre to 200 bushel, which was astronomical and unheard of at that time. There's no doubt that vegetable farming in Mason County has been a great asset for everybody within the county and within central Illinois.
Along with this same thing came the specialty crops in the Mason County area, the green beans, the peas, the potatoes, and the irrigation of the seed corn, popcorn, made the irrigation a lot more feasible than it was for the traditional row crops of corn and soybeans. Although the corn and soybeans, the increased yields up there did make it feasible.
We had to beef up the system all over, put in substations and so forth that could carry this kind of load. And it was a seasonal load. It was hard to develop a rate that would not affect us adversely in our wholesale power and still give them a reasonable rate that they could use. But it worked out, and they did well, and the co-op did well because of it.
With our irrigation rate and working with the farmers up there, we were able to prove that it was the way to go. And as of today, there are about 2,000 irrigation systems in the Mason County area, and a large number of them are served by Menard Electric.
Over the years of my public career, no other domestic activity has been closer to my heart than the program which has lighted the homes and the lives of rural America. And that's our program of rural electric cooperatives.
We helped operate the youth tour on a local basis and encouraged high school juniors to enter.
I was fortunate in 1967, when I was a junior in high school, the information came out about an essay contest from Menard Electric for a Youth to Washington tour. And being a farm girl who hadn't traveled a lot, it sounded exciting. And it was interesting and something to pursue, and so I did. And I was very fortunate. I believe there were 8 or 10 of us that were in competition for the essay contest, and we had to write essays on what Menard Electric did for progressing our area. Back then, that was a hot topic, and there was lots of things going on, and what it did for us was very important. So it was exciting. I did learn things when I wrote the essay contest and realized that Menard Electric started with 120 miles of lines. What an achievement for a group of men to come together and set up. The trip was a dream come true. There were 52 from Illinois that met in Springfield at the state co-op office and boarded buses for an all-night drive to Gettysburg. It was a fantastic experience. It was so interesting to see the impact of the importance of what rural America does. The other thing that was really unique in that is that we had the opportunity to visit with all of the political figures that were key in what was happening in the nation. We went to the White House. Lyndon Johnson was the president. He actually came and met with us, a group of students. The impact of helping young people learn the benefits and the meaning and the history of rural electrification, I think, is valuable, because those may be the people who are helping to support those kinds of efforts that they continue to work on today. I believe it was Earl Pillsbury who perhaps asked me if I would be interested in being in the Menard Electric Queen Pageant.
The Queen contest we operated after the first year I was there, selecting beauty queens from the membership of our co-op. Some years there were a very small number that applied. Some years we had quite a few. And we always seemed to have what I thought was probably the prettiest ones around.
If you know Earl Pillsbury, Earl's a hard person to say no to. He can convince lots of people to do lots of things. And I don't remember the particulars, but I remember Earl's smile and saying, it'll be fun. And Earl was right, it was fun. And I was very fortunate that in 1968 I was in the pageant and happened to win the pageant. Those are the kinds of things that help you build a foundation of having some confidence and knowing how to handle situations. And one of the things I remember the most about moving on and being a participant in the state pageant was that the state pageant was at the very same time as the Menard County Fair. It was very conflicting to decide whether to go to the pageant or show livestock at the fair. Well, the pageant won, and I went to the pageant, and I'm glad I did, because it was a good experience, and I think I probably have to thank Earl Pillsbury for that.
Albert Hendricks, when I came here, he was the line superintendent, but he was doing everything. He was staking line. He was running the crews, directing the servicemen, where they went, what they did. Albert had been here so long, he could almost tell you what size wire was going into anybody's house and on the system, and how many wires and how many poles and how tall the poles was and so forth. Man, he was a great guy. He was just one of the great employees we had there.
I did line construction in the service, and then when I come back from Vietnam, I worked about a year in Lincoln, and then I started working at Menard Electric November 5th, 1970. That was a time that the co-op hadn't hired anybody for several years. It was like 15 or 16 years since they had hired anybody in line construction. Then they started a pole testing program that they had to do a lot of maintenance work and new construction, so they needed a lot more younger people. And that's when they hired several other people after me, Terry Cutright and Mark Bradley, Marcel Barreau. A lot of the older guys that have retired, and they were easy to work with. Just being a lineman, you know, being able to do that type of work and working with other guys, it's kind of a close-knit family. You climb poles and you do line construction, you work with high voltages and stuff like that. It's kind of unique and very interesting type of work. It was just kind of a challenge to try to do the best job I could and, you know, meet their expectations too.
At that time, I'll know about, I've been here a few years, was the Easter weekend of 1978.
Well, Good Friday 1978 woke up that morning, and of course it was starting to sleet and snow. I lived in the Havana area. I was doing some shopping and running errands. I don't know what all I was doing. And about noon, I got a call from John Root, and he said, "Why aren't you down here?" And I said, "Why?" And he said, "We're in a major ice storm. We're having problems." And I thought sure you'd be here. It was snowing and sleeting a little bit in Havana, but we did not have near the ice that they had in Petersburg and south. So I jumped in the car and drove down and could not believe when I got closer to Petersburg the icy conditions and what was happening. And I didn't go home for 3 days. And then, of course, it took us about 2 weeks to restore everything. At that time, I was doing most of the purchasing for the co-op. And John told me, he said, "We're going to need a lot of hardware, we're going to need a lot of poles, we're going to need a lot of conductor." And he said, "You better start getting on the phone and start getting it done." Later on, every morning when I'd come to work, there would be 3 to 4 trailer loads of poles sitting on the streets of Petersburg ready to be dispatched into the area where they were needed most.
My wife almost left me because I didn't come home for a couple of weeks. That was quite a weekend that extended out.
It just kept falling down around us. We couldn't make progress out of it. We worked 16, 18 hours a day, and then we'd come back and start over again. And we had all these outside contractors and the co-op come in and want to know where our bucket trucks was. And we had buckets we could put on the end of the booms is all we had. We didn't get a bucket truck until after the ice storm that fall. You know, after about a week and a half, we started getting a lot of people back on.
As I remember, we had upwards of 250 people that were hired to work for us, coming from Missouri, and Kentucky, Tennessee, and Indiana, and Iowa, and getting places for them to stay and places for them to eat. It was tough enough, but the line superintendent at that time, getting them all lined out, getting the materials for them to work, etc., was astronomical. And that was a great disaster in central Illinois.
It worked out that we finally got the job done, and it was the thing that was the most disappointment in my whole career of managing Menard Electric. I had a goal when I came here, get the co-op members to own 35% of the system. And at that point, it would make the co-op strong enough that we could begin retiring capital credits. The ice storm cost $3 million that took that all away.
And the fact that we had to borrow additional funds, and it was a major tax on our cash flow at the time. John Root always wanted to be able to begin to retire capital credits. And so it was about another 10 years before we were able to begin to look at retiring capital credits. But that is one thing that the board, once they got it started, every year they are retiring these funds back to the members that furnished them the capital for the initial construction and the continuation of the co-op.
And I can't say too little about the people who worked for me. They were all loyal, good employees. And everybody worked for a common cause, and it gave you a good feeling when you think about it back. My heart's still there.
I think the electric co-ops are kind of unique in this way. It is a family. It is a wonderful place to work. And I can start naming the fellows that worked 35 or 40 years in addition to myself, and directors that served for 30 plus years just because they enjoyed being a director of the co-op.
We were able in some way to help many people, at least we felt like we did, from the standpoint of reasoning, cooperating, and trying to show people the advantages that they would have with the electricity. I really believe that the co-op has made a substantial difference in the livelihood, the economic conditions of central Illinois. I think generally over the years, the board of directors of the co-op has followed that initiative, that they are forward-thinking people.
We're here at this 75th anniversary. One of the things that's kind of unique is to look back at the cooperative and how it's evolved over time. And certainly the people have changed, but their attitude and their commitment has stayed the same. But one of the things that's really evolving quickly is technology. Every year that goes by, there are enhances in technology that just keep allowing us to deliver stronger and better services. Sometimes it takes fewer people to deliver better service because of technology. And yet those people services are still the most important thing that we can deliver. And I think there's a balance there that you have to strike between where technology makes our service less personal. It's still going to take a determined lineman, skilled and working hard in order to build the lines that need to be built. It's still going to take people in the field to respond to storms and replace and repair damages that are caused by Mother Nature. And our office folks are still going to need to listen to people and know the personal side of their struggles and with the services that they need, and we can help them get the best service they can from Menard Electric. We don't want to go too far in losing the personal connection and the commitment of our employees to deliver the best that we can.